Hi, so for this episode, we will be talking about the emotion and of course the influence of the nervous system. Okay, so let's start with the three components given by the definition of the psychologist.
So let's talk about a topic important to songwriters everywhere, emotions. Emotions are felt by everyone, but how they are expressed and experienced is very different depending on the individual, which makes them complicated to understand. But simply put, in psychology, we understand emotions to be subjective experiences that accompany by physiological, behavioral, and cognitive changes and reactions. So let me explain each of these in a bit more detail. First, let's look at the physiological components of an emotional experience. Every emotion produces different physiological responses within the body, which can include distinct changes and patterns of the brain activation, neurotransmitter production, and autonomic nervous system activity. For example, let's use you as an example here. You're standing here in a room and then all of a sudden, surprise, everyone jumps out and surprises you because it happens to be your birthday. So you, the individual here, might have a distinct physiological reaction. Your heart rate may increase as a result of being startled, your muscles may be temporarily tense and then relax, and your skin temperature may increase as well. Now, at the same time, your cognitive process is ongoing as well, but are varying culture to culture. So cognitive reactions are mental of assessments that can include appraisal and what is happening, expectation about the situation, and general thoughts about the experience. So in this example, for the surprise party, someone who has been to a surprise party before may have the expectation that it'll be fun, or they might be thinking about the people who are there, or maybe they're just saying, "Oh my God," because they are so surprised. This is an example of cognitive experience happening as a result of emotions. These cognitive experiences can also bring in bad emotions. So for instance, if you happen to think about how you dislike parties, now I don't know why, but if you really don't like parties for some reason, you might feel like dread at the prospect of a surprise party instead of joy. And that emotion was brought on by your cognitive experience. And lastly, each emotion produces different behavioral responses which can be evident in body language or facial expression. So in our surprise example, an individual may smile, clap their hands in delight, or open their arms, or hug their friends and relatives. Again, these expressions vary by individual and can be interpreted differently culture to culture. So let's return to our chart here and review the basics. Emotions are made up of cognitive, behavioral, and physiological changes that are all interrelated. But what else do we know about emotion? Well, first, emotions are temporary. They have relatively clear beginnings and relatively short durations, unlike moods, which can be not necessarily discrete. Secondly, emotion can be negative or positive. So as an example, someone can be happy or sad, angry or delighted. Along the same lines, emotions can vary intensely, so a person can experience a little bit of sadness or a deep feeling of depression. They can be extremely ecstatic or just a little pissed. And lastly, emotions generally are involuntary. It means that you can't decide what you will experience, which is why we use these phrases such as someone falls in love or explodes with rage, or is overwhelmed with excitement. These expressions kind of illustrate how emotions are involuntary. So with all that in mind, here's a question for you. How many emotions are there? Well, the answer is there's probably an infinite number, but a researcher named Paul Ekman found that there are a special set of 6 emotions that could be easily identified by individuals all around the world, and these are known as the universal emotions. And these universal emotions are happiness, sadness, fear, disgust, anger, and surprise. And you might be wondering why they're called universal emotions. Now, they aren't called universal emotions because everyone feels them the same way. They're called universal emotion because It has consistent facial impressions across, and so they're easily recognizable cultural background you may come from. So here's an example of the 6 universal emotions. I'm gonna give you a few seconds here to look at, maybe pause this video and see if you can guess what each of these 6 represent. I'm gonna go through each of these expressions here and show how they relate to the emotion, how they represent. Now I can't kick out of this. I'm gonna explain emotions that we all experience every day, and I'm gonna explain it in a very clinical, cold sounding manner. But I think it's kinda breakdown like here. So here's the happiness. It's representing the raised cheeks. You can see elevated concerns of the mouth. Sometimes teeth are exposed, sometimes wrinkles on the outward corners of the eyes. So that's happiness. And here we have the sadness. Sadness represented by uplifted inner corner of the eyebrows, some downturned lips, and here's fear. Fear is represented by eyebrows being raised and drawn together, wrinkles in the middle of the forehead. Eyes are open and tense, mouth is open right here, lips are drawn back tightly, so that's fear. And now we have anger. It represented by penetrating stare that they have. Your eyelids are tense, your lips are pressed together, so that's anger. And here's disgust, represented by raised cheeks, wrinkled nose. Your brows are lowered and with surprise, just like we saw on the little cartoon we drew earlier. Surprise has raised eyebrows, eyes are open wide, the jaw is dropped, so they have an open mouth, so that's surprise. And here's another question to consider. Why would these emotions be universally recognizable? Well, the answer comes to use from Charles Darwin. You probably know of Darwin and his study in evolution. Hypothesize and understand emotion is an innate ability. It helps individuals to act in ways in a better chance of survival. So emotions actually have an adaptive value. And this makes a lot of sense. If they're surprised or frightened, they often react in ways that are very similar to how grown-ups act. But newborn babies are brand new to the world. They've never been taught how to do these things. Their body just reacts that way. And what's really interesting is that individuals who have been blind their entire lives and have never been able to see of what a human face looks like, they also have similar facial expressions to people who can see even though they have never seen a smile or a frown. This also supports the idea that the expression of some emotions are innate. So when it comes to emotions, think of the 3 components: the cognitive, physiological, and the behavioral. And remember that universal emotions exist.
So after knowing the 3 components of the emotion, let's go deeper with the different theories of emotion.
Many people discount the importance of emotions, but emotions help us in a variety of ways. Our emotional instinct help us assess threats, survive, and grow. But how do emotions occur? And what are the basic emotions? That's what this video will focus on. Various theories such as the common sense, James Ledd's label approach and rational motive, and the basic emotions with a nod to Robert Plutchik's emotions wheel. There are a number of theories about how emotions occur, and most just moving around because things happen. All of them, however, start with a stimulus or what some call an activating event. The stimulus could be someone's behavior, even your own, an event, something that you react to. The common sense theory suggests that emotions just happen, and they happen as response to stimulus, and then your body responds. For example, you meet someone new, you feel nervous and uncertain as an emotional response, then your body responds a physiological reaction by blushing, increased heart rate, etc. This approach implies that you have no idea or choice that stimulus caused your reaction. James Lodge's approach reverses the last 2 steps. Now you meet someone new, the stimulus which may cause you to blush or your heart start pounding, which result in you feeling nervous and uncertain, or your emotional reaction. I said may cause a physiological response because in this theory, if there is no physical reaction to the stimulus, there would be no emotion. The third theory, appraisal label approach, takes the James Love view and inserts an additional step between the physiological reaction and the emotional reaction. The stimulus still causes the physiological reaction, but then your brain gets involved as you label your response. The label you use determines the emotion you experience. Depending on how you label the physiological response, you will experience different emotions. In other words, if you label heart pounding and blushing as nervous, you will feel nervous. If, however, you label excitement, then you will feel excitement. This last approach allows us to have more control over our emotions because what we think is instrumental in what we feel. If we change our thoughts, we can manage our emotions. That brings us to another theory, the rational motive theory, as proposed by psychologist Albert Ellis in 1955. It is very similar to the label approach. Instead of saying that an event causes your emotion, Ellis says that how you think about those events is what causes your emotions. Yeah, pure thinking causes your emotions, not what someone says to you or how he behaves around you. He still starts the stimulus, or what he calls the activating event. Then your thoughts about the event create your emotional response, which results in your physiological response. Say your friend is late for an appointment, that would be the activating event, the stimulus, or the catalyst that starts your thinking process. Your brain goes into action with thoughts, and there are a variety of thoughts to choose. From could she have gotten into an accident? Maybe she's late because she got that job she was interviewing for. She doesn't think my time is important. Well, this is just how she is, and so on. You are actually engaging in self-talk, and while you are talking to yourself, your emotions come into play: worry, hope, frustration, acceptance. Your thoughts cause your emotions. If you're like me, your thoughts aren't confined to a single sentence. She does think my time is important, maybe followed by this has happened before. In fact, many times before. That's not fair. I'm just as important as she is, and before you know it, your thoughts have spiraled, and your physical reaction have spiraled as well. You find your jaws tightening, your eyes rolling, and before you know it, your frustration has escalated into anger. You're fuming, ready to attack your friend when she finally arrives. The value of this approach is this: if you change your thought, then you change your emotions and how you respond to your emotions. Notate the name of this theory includes the word rational. If you can think rationally about the activating event, you should be able to control your emotions. Ellis took this approach and developed what he called rational motive behavioral therapy to help therapy sessions such as anger and stress management, or REBT, with the focus on altering your thought process to change your emotions. This in turn will affect your physiological reaction in the long run, allowing you to adjust your behavior. Notice that for our example, I identified 5 different emotions. There are many more, way too many to list here. How many emotions are there? It depends on who you ask. Aristotle identified 9: anger, friendship, fear, shame, kindness, pity, indignation, envy, and love. And Darwin added some more. American physiologists Paul Ekman and Wallace developed a list of 6 basic emotions that they say are commutative by facial expression, often called universal emotions, as they are said to be recognized across cultures: anger, fear, disgust, surprise, and sadness. Dr. Robert, who Wikipedia credits as the developer of one of the most influential classification approaches for general emotional responses, created the emotion wheel, listing 8 basic emotions. You can think of this emotion as 4 pairs of opposites: joy and sadness and disgust, fear and anger, and surprise and anticipation. I also classify them as positive: joy, acceptance, anticipation, surprise, or negative: anger, fear, disgust, and sadness. Positive emotion to our health. According to Plotchik, we can experience opposite emotion at the same time, such as the positive emotion of acceptance and the negative emotion of disgust. In fact, this is a major criticism approach has many degrees, citing the example of joy and sadness on opposite ends of the emotion wheel, and a positive and a negative. emotion, which many parents reporting feeling when their children head off to college or getting married. He did suggest that we can experience blends of emotions. If you look at the emotion wheel, joy and acceptance are right next to each other. If you combine these two, you'll have the complex emotion of love. In the same way, combining acceptance and fear produces submission, fear, and surprise. Result in awe, surprise, sadness produce disappointment, sadness, and disgust. Remorse, disgust, and anger turn into contempt, anger, and anticipation yield aggressiveness. And anticipation and joy produce optimism. And again, he believes that contradictory blended emotions such as love and remorse cannot exist at the same time. He also proposed that emotions vary in their intensity. Think of the emotion wheel as just one level or row in a solid cylinder, often called the emotion solid. The emotion at the top of the solid above plastics, basic emotions are more intense, while those at the bottom of the solid are less intense. You can probably see it easier if we spread out the solid. Notice that anger when more extreme is rage, while when less intense it is merely annoyance. More intense than joy is ecstasy, while serenity is a more muted emotion. You'll probably notice that as emotions become less intense, they are more difficult to tell apart and label. In fact, we may not even have the vocabulary words for what we are experiencing. Let's end with some interesting findings about emotion. Interesting, but perhaps not surprising. If you want to estimate the intensity of an emotion, pay attention to posture and gestures. As an example, someone who is angry tends to gesture very quickly and sharply. Women tend to be better than men at recognizing emotions, particularly ones relating to vulnerability, oftentimes without being aware that they are doing it. And women are also more non-verbally expressive, meaning they use non-verbal cues to express their emotions. There is some evidence, however, that men are better at noticing emotion involving lust and anger. The older you get, the more accurate you are at reading other people's emotions. Probably not surprising, the longer you live, the more experiences you have to help you recognize emotions. And there are different cultures. You are more accurate at interpreting emotion when you're communicating with others. Your same culture than when you're communicating with others who have different cultures. Other interesting finding relates to where you focus your attention on facial expression. If you are from culture that values emotion control, like Japan, you tend to look the eyes for emotions. However, if your culture tends to be more open about expressing your emotion, like the United States, you tend to focus on the mouth for clues as to how people feel. Regardless of your sex, age, or culture, emotions are a natural part of life. Even naturalists, Charles Darwin recognized their importance to our ability to survive. So you can't and shouldn't stop experiencing emotions. The major question is, how will you manage your emotions? The nervous system have two distinct parts, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Since we are discussing about the emotions, we will only be including the peripheral nervous system that have two parts, the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. In relating the nervous system to emotions, the autonomic nervous system is the one involved. Emotional situations arouse the autonomic nervous system, which, as I mentioned, have two parts, the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system prepares the body for brief, vigorous, fight or flight response, while the parasympathetic nervous system increases digestion and other processes that save energy and prepare for later events. However, each situation evokes its own spill mixture of sympathetic and parasympathetic arousal. For example, a nausea is associated with sympathetic stimulation of the stomach, decreasing its contractions and secretions, and parasympathetic stimulation of the intestine and salivary glands.